Today, I'm going to be joined by Anoop Nathwani. And Anoop is a globally recognized authority and a world-class expert in strategic partnerships and alliances, worth over $1 billion in total impact. That's incredible, don't you think? Anoop is a catalyst for transformative change and improvement in high-profile global partnerships. He brings alliance best practices to multiple business areas. And his differentiation is that he can contain costs while strategically utilizing partnerships and resources to create the largest top and bottom line impact, all while meeting long-term goals. So let me bring on Anoop. Anoop, are you ready?
Yeah.
Hi there. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, Leela. Thank you. Thanks for bringing me on. I really appreciate this.
Oh, you're most welcome. It's great to have you here with us today. So thank you for taking some time out to speak with us. And I wanted to dive straight in because today's all about strategic alliances. So for those of you who are watching who may be not familiar with that, what it means, tell me, Anoop, what is the meaning of strategic alliances?
Okay, it's a good question, and I think it's a lot of people don't necessarily get this right. So let me give you a definition that I and my alliance partner use. So a strategic alliance it's an alliance. It's a strategic cooperation between two or more organizations with the aim to achieve a result one of the parties cannot achieve alone. Yeah, it's the 1 + 1 = 3 or more effect. So that's in a simple nutshell. That's what I call a strategic alliance, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So it's a bit like a collaboration, right? It's we can't always do everything on our own. So by collaborating with another alliance partner, we can maybe get to the result or the goal a lot quicker and bring in additional skills and expertise.
Correct. I think collaboration is a very broad term. You do get lots of collaboration, etc. The alliance is much more specific. It is a collaboration, but it's pretty intense in the way companies actually go about doing something. So you need to attach resources to it and actually invest in it, if that makes sense. Not necessarily from a monetary perspective, but from a time and effort perspective to make it work. Yeah.
Right. Makes sense. So tell me then, how important is it in business to have a strategic alliance?
It's very important, I think, let me paint a picture, because I think I like doing this in terms of painting pictures. So if we cast and we need to cast our mind back a bit. So if we think about before the pandemic, before coronavirus, before it struck, over for the few years before it struck, we saw a vast number of CEOs recognizing that the business needed to change. Yeah, they need to change from a transformation perspective, whether digitally or otherwise. They need to innovate. They need to become more sustainable. Customers were demanding they did something differently. So I picture that as, the CEO sitting on a coastline, and they're watching a tsunami in the distance, right? And that tsunami is driven by the things I mentioned, like the digital transformation, the innovation, the sustainability, the customer centricity. So it's in the distance, right? Now, in the pool of those CEOs, I think all the sort of reports I read, up to 75% of the CEOs recognize that the best and most agile way to transform and innovate, etc., was through partnerships and alliances. So they recognize that. They also recognize the fact that, to digitally transform, they need to leverage on digital technologies to be able to do that. But the way they went into it, only 15% of, say, the digital transformations were successful before the pandemic, right?
Okay.
And then something happened. Okay, the pandemic struck, and it's like a very, very big meteor, which crashed into the waters. So the coronavirus was a big meteor, crashed into the waters, and what it did is it made the tsunami angrier, bigger, faster, and what was now seen as it was something in the distance now became much more prevalent. It was literally right upon us, bearing down on the businesses. And it's still being driven by all the factors that I discussed, but the urgency around it became a lot bigger. And particularly a lot of businesses and a lot of sectors recognize that digital transformation is something they need to do, and that the customers really changed the way that they interacted with businesses through the pandemic, right? So it really just drove the whole tsunami effect a lot faster. Now, another thing that kind of drove this is the fact that there's been a lack of capital finance, right? Because of the kind of recessionary effects and whatever. And what a lot of companies said is, in order to fund some of the activities we need to do to drive partnerships alliances, we're going to need to sell off some of the areas that are seen as non-strategic to invest in the areas that we need to do as strategic. And I think from that perspective, what was seen is that partnering is no longer a nice to do; it's now become a must do. Yeah.
Right.
So we're certainly seeing that. Now, the thing that I would say as well is that the waters, to get the way to do this is the CEOs recognize they need to get on top of this pandemic and on the other side. Yeah. However, the waters on the other side are not that calm. Yeah. Failures in alliances partnerships were very high and are still very high.
Right.
So they need to think about how they create those successful partnerships. And there's a way to actually go about doing that. And that requires leadership skills, right? As one of the key competencies. So one of the things I clearly say is alliances, as I said, is no longer a nice to do. It's now become a must do. It's created an outsized opportunity for businesses to do something different and move away as a leader in what they do. It requires leadership skills, and therefore what I say is alliances is actually the new leadership. So that's the kind of view that I take on why alliances. It's an absolute necessity, if that makes sense.
Right. Okay. So then tell me, you've talked about the impact of the pandemic on everything, on businesses and strategy. So how would you create a new alliance opportunity within this environment? What would be the approach?
The way to do it, and it's still the way that that you do it before the pandemic as well, is it needs to be a strategy-driven process. So what needs to happen, the way to create it, is the strategy of the organization you work for has to drive what you do. And if the strategy says we need to do X, but we can't do X just on our own, right? You then need to make a decision. How am I going to go about doing it? Do I bring in the resources and spend the money to try and do it myself? Or at the opposite end of the spectrum, do I go and acquire a company or a part of a business to do it? But again, requires money, requires effort, etc. Or the piece that's missing is in the middle. Do I actually leverage and borrow capabilities, assets, resources from a company that has the complementary capabilities to go about doing it? And the way to do it is you need to understand, what are my needs as a business, right? What is it that the other potential businesses out there can contribute to that? But more importantly is how do I create new value for my customers? You've got to put the customers at the very, very center of what you're doing, because if you don't, you're actually wasting a lot of time and effort to actually partner with another organization and say, great, we're creating a win-win. And what I say to them is, you've missed something. You've missed something really big. Where's the third win? Where's the win for that customer or the group of customers or the patients that you're trying to create something for? Because if you haven't done it, you're just wasting a lot of time and effort. So you need to kind of look at a three-way approach, i.e. look at the needs that you have as an organization, look at what the other organizations can bring, but importantly, look at what the customers will get from it. What are their needs? What are the benefits they'll get? And will you create value for them as a customer? Because if you're not going to do it, don't do it. Yeah.
Right. So it's not only about shareholder value, then it's also about remembering the customer.
You're remembering the customer, and you need to go beyond shareholder value. So I think you bring up an interesting point here, because I think a lot of companies now are being judged on not just shareholder value, they're being judged on stakeholder value as well. And stakeholder value looks a lot broader, as you know. It looks at customers, looks at partners, looks at suppliers. It looks at the whole sustainability agenda, the whole thing. Yeah. And companies need to start looking at that. So So an interesting point here is companies now need to think about partnering to look at sustainable solutions because they're not going to be able to do it themselves. Yeah. And I see a lot of that happening out there at the moment. Yeah. A lot of really great examples.
Okay. And so thank you for sharing that. I think I guess something that I'm curious about is how do you even begin to measure the success of a partnership? Because you identify the gap. In my mind, it's right. We've got a gap here. What do we do? So you outline those three options, right? So you bring in extra resources, you maybe look to buy another business, or you leverage, you borrow from others' expertise, which is where the alliance comes in.
Correct.
And what are you bringing them in for? Is to help fill to close that gap, right? So how do you then measure the success? Because I'm guessing both parties want to ensure that there's some progress being made, that, as you said, it's a win-win-win for everyone. So how do you do that?
So it's a fantastic question. And a lot of people say to me, well, Anoop, measuring success, it's all about money, isn't it? It's all about money. It's all about looking at revenue. And I just say, no, you're missing something there, because there's a number of ways of looking at how do you measure success, how you look at value. I typically, when I look at value, I depict this thing called the value iceberg. So if you think about an iceberg, right? What you measure at the top of the iceberg is what you see. So your financials is what you measure up there. Your customers is what you measure up there. Any solutions that you create, you measure up there. But guess what is the dangerous part of the iceberg? It's a bit below the waterline, isn't it? That's the huge piece that sunk the Titanic and other things. So there's a lot of intangible value that needs to be measured. Things like, have you created a competitive advantage? Things like, have you become a partner of choice? Have you developed a fantastic level of trust with your partner such that you have gained access into the leadership of that other organization and thought leaders in the other organization, right? You've got to measure those bits and pieces, because actually the intangible value, we say it's a dangerous part, but it's actually the most important part of measuring value in an alliance. And unfortunately, that's the piece that gets missed. And what I do with my alliance partners, we train people to actually say, you need to look at a balanced approach. Yes, you need to look at the things you can measure, but you've got to look at the things that you can't necessarily measure, but actually put some parameters around it in terms of how you would look at that. And another analogy there, Leela, is the fact that where people look at financial measures as saying, yeah, I've been successful, I treat it like if you're driving a car, okay, the financial measures are looking in your rearview mirror, because the financial measures happened. It's a cause and effect. The effect is the financial measures. So you're looking in the rearview mirror. Problem is, if you're just looking in the rearview mirror, you're not looking ahead. And and by looking ahead, what you need to think about is looking at things like the relationship. Yeah, the thing that the cause or the thing that's going to drive the effect. And quite often, if you miss the relational aspects, the building of trust, the building of becoming a partner of choice, etc., if you miss those pieces, your revenue is going to reflect on it, because you're not going to achieve the financial results that you'd expect if you don't measure the intangible stuff. Yeah. So I quite often have that debate with alliance professionals, and my partner and I have that debate a lot with them. We try and ground them to saying, you need to think about this from a strategic value perspective, and always think about cause and effect. Always think about value being measured based on purpose. So if your purpose, for instance, is with your alliance partner to drive net zero carbon emissions for your customers, you're not going to measure finance, are you? You're going to measure if they're driving net zero carbon emissions. Yeah. So it's that kind of stuff that needs to be thought about.
Right. So there's a lot there in terms of how to measure success. There's a lot of intangibles, and I guess that's what you help your clients, your partners with. It's I guess a framework of KPIs of what is it that we're going to measure to ensure this is a success.
It's a balanced approach. Yeah. And the interesting thing is with some of the clients and some of the companies that I've worked for as well, I really opened their eyes, because they would only measure financials, And I'd say, what about looking at trust? And they said, well, you can't measure it. And I said, yes, you can. Yes, you can. And we actually have a way of measuring trust. It's not an exact science, but it's something there, and you can measure it, and you can actually show whether the trust is getting better or whether it's getting worse, right? So these are sort of things that really open the eyes of senior leaders when they look at that and just think, I never thought about that. Yeah.
Yeah. And what I like about this kind of brings in the personal branding aspect, because one of the key parts of that is relationships for me. So there's 6 core pillars that I focus on for your personal brand. One of them is relationships. And
Yes.
within that, it's about building trust. That's a big part of it, is having that integrity of being seen as a trusted advisor. But you've got to earn that. You've got to work at it. You've got
Correct.
to nurture it. And
Correct.
so your personal brand, therefore, is an important, significant part of being an alliance partner and making that successful.
That's correct. In fact, Leela, the interesting thing is, again, both myself and my alliance partner, we always say alliances are built by companies. Yeah, they're negotiated by companies, pulled together by companies. They're executed by people, by us as individuals. So it's all about the relationship, and it's all about communication. And the biggest failure rates in alliances, which is still very, very high, the biggest reason for failures in alliances comes down to relationship and communication. They're the 2 biggest reasons for it. There are some others as well, but they're the biggest drivers of failure rates in alliances. Yeah.
And that's really interesting to know that. So a couple of points there is, number one, communication is another big pillar that I focus on with personal brand, is effective communication at all levels, whether it's, you stood there presenting, whether you're having a conversation like this, a one-to-one conversation, it can be anything, but it's really fundamental. So when you talk about communication, what do you mean as it being a failure? In what way?
Well, the assumption that communication has taken place. Yeah. So there's a lot of assumptions when people say communication has taken place when it has not. Also, when you're communicating, make sure that you're clear on what you're communicating about. Quite often you see people using acronyms when they communicate, etc. And the assumption is the other people understand acronyms. So you need to kind of clarify that. From an alignment perspective, some of the dialogue that you may use. So I talked about digital transformation. To me, digital transformation means something different to someone else, right? So let's be clear on what digital transformation is. Coming back to the thinking about partnerships, alliances, the way I think about partnerships and the way I talk about partnerships is very, very different maybe to some others. So let's be clear on what we mean. And an example on that one is I've seen companies who say, well, they form a partnership and said, and the one company says to the other, well, we have a joint venture, don't we? And I would say, no. You know what a joint venture means. A joint venture is 2 companies that come together and create a separate company, right? Funded with shareholder agreements, etc. And that joint venture is a separate company. So they say, no, but we don't have a joint venture. We have a contract between the 2 of us. It's a joint venture, is it? And I said, no, it's not. Yeah. So that level of communication and alignment of that, etc., is critically important. And as I said, we always say, communicate. And if you think you've communicated, think again, communicate again. Yeah.
Yeah. I think a big takeaway there is never assume, right? You've got to be really clear. And
Correct.
Again.
Correct. And particularly in the world that we're in right now, where we're not seeing people physically at the moment, it's still virtual. Yes, that's going to change. My goodness me, the level of communication needs to be really, really crisp and clear. Yeah.
No, absolutely. Totally. Yeah. So you've talked about, or you've identified a couple of the things for us that are the biggest failures of a strategic alliance, which is relationships, communications. What are the core pillars, would you say? Because you mentioned a number of things in terms of measurables. What would you say are the core pillars of successful strategic alliance?
So the key elements of success that I tend to look at are, the first is around building and maintaining alignment, both internally and externally. And this is important because I always say to people that you have to build internal alignment in your own organization first. So you need to partner internally first before you can think about partnering externally. Because if you can't do it internally, you don't stand a hope in hell of doing it externally.
And
right?
what do you actually mean by that, internal alignment?
The interesting thing is in larger organizations, and I've had this experience when I know when the strategy says that we need to form a partnership, and I know we need to partner, a lot of the stakeholders will, or quite a few of the stakeholders would not get behind you. They would say, "No, I don't want to partner. We can do this ourselves." It's the arrogance around wanting to do them themselves and keep control of what they want to do, as opposed to having to share control, and all that kind of stuff. So you get a lot of resistance internally, particularly in large organizations, to wanting to partner. They don't see the value of it. So it's really, really important, particularly with the stakeholders who are going to be part of your virtual team, that you get them on your side, that you work with them and you make sure you partner with them internally first, right? And I would say to do that, you need to spend at least 70 to 80% of your time internally. So if you're looking at 100% of your time, 70 to 80% of your time should be spent internally with the stakeholders, etc., and the people you're going to work with before you actually go external, right? And it's a tough job to be able to do that.
Yeah, and I totally get where you're coming from, and that completely makes sense, because if you don't have the buy-in from people internally, from the get-go, you're going to struggle with the other party.
Agreed. And the other thing is if it's going to be a strategic alliance, if this is a normal alliance, a strategic alliance an alliance will not be strategic unless you have executive sponsorship. So guess what? You have to have executive sponsorship if it's going to be a strategic alliance, right? And if you don't have an executive sponsor, you're going to struggle. You're really going to struggle, because the exec sponsor can help you internally and externally as well, and you absolutely need that. Yeah. So I think that's kind of the a one key pillar. The second pillar, and so that's around alignment and communication, okay, both internally and externally. The second pillar is make sure you choose your partner properly. And an analogy there, I hear a lot of scenarios where CEOs will meet each other on an aircraft, or on a golf course or whatever, and they say, you know what, we know each other well, we have some complementary capabilities, etc. And I think one of the things we should do is to look to see how we can partner. And they come back into the business and say, right, we're going to form a partnership with company XYZ. I met him I met the CEO on a golf course on the airplane, and we believe we can actually do something together. So to the alliance managers, go do. Yeah, that is absolutely a recipe for disaster, right? Choose your partners properly by actually assessing them and selecting them in the right way. And there's a rigorous process. So if we think about the analogy is M&A, yeah. When companies go into an M&A process, they go through a rigorous process.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't we do the same in selecting and assessing a partner? So again, that needs to be done. So that's kind of the second thing I would look at. We talked about communication, open and transparent communication. That's important. I think it's important to have kind of very clear and dedicated roles and responsibilities. Make sure there's a good governance structure, and make sure that the relationships, the alliance relationships, are evaluated regularly, because you need to know when it's going off rail. Yeah.
How would you know? What would
well, there are health checks. There are health checks. And again, my alliance partner and I advocate that. Now, the interesting thing is, a lot of companies who do alliances recognize that health checks are important, but they don't prioritize it. They say, we'll wait, we'll do it at an appropriate time. And the problem is they wait till it's too late. And then they do a health check when something's gone wrong, and they have to work pretty hard to bring it back on track. Yeah. We always suggest that you should do a regular health check with your alliance partner, because particularly the relationships, etc., if you're seeing it going off skew very quickly, you need to nip it in the bud very quickly, because that will impact all sorts of other results that you look at. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So that's important. So they're kind of some key success elements that we look at in terms of creating successful alliances. That's only some of them, Leela. There are a lot more. Yeah.
And there's a lot just in those four that you've shared there, because you've talked about internal alignment, which I think, as you said, is probably one of the toughest things to get buy-in from everyone, because people like to hold everything close and, you know,
Correct.
don't want to share, and they want that control. So that's a big one to get over as a hurdle, I think. And as you say, making sure you've got executive sponsors, because otherwise you're kind of going nowhere.
And then the external alignment is important. Once you get that, you go to the external piece as well, right?
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. And then you talk about choosing the partner properly. There's a process, and you often hear stories of people are, you know, they meet on, as you great examples, on a plane, on a golf course, have a chat. Oh, let's do something together. And he said, it's a disaster.
Yeah. Or the scenario is, you know, some smaller companies, let's say in the tech business, some smaller companies may say, I know I need to partner with Microsoft because Microsoft, I'm just giving an example, because Microsoft is big and therefore we're small, and we know we need to partner with Microsoft because working with Microsoft gives us brand leverage as a smaller company, just to say we're working with them, which is understandable. But have they done the analysis that is Microsoft the right partner for them or not, as the case may be? So just to give you an example, quite often they jump into that scenario without actually doing an assessment or analysis on whether that's right or wrong. Yeah, that's just an example.
Yeah, no, and that makes sense. It's almost like the surface level, it all sounds great, but actually you've got to kind of do the due diligence underneath to make sure that it all stacks up.
Correct.
Yeah. And you talked, as you said, communication, being open, being transparent, which again comes back to the alignment at the start and getting the buy-in from people so you can have that transparency.
Yep.
And then the fourth one you mentioned, delegating clear roles and responsibilities, of course, because again, if you haven't got that, you've got the assumptions that come in, which is, again, a recipe for disaster, right?
Yeah, agreed. And I think, you know, I do see a number of companies that have alliance people doing a side of desk job. Right, so the main job is, say, a project manager or a program manager, etc., and the side of desk job is as a partnership or alliance manager. And the problem is, they, with all due respect, they don't necessarily have the right skills or competencies to be able to drive this alliance way of thinking, and it's just kind of a bit of noise on their part. That they're just doing it as a side of desk job, and if it's not a dedicated role, it's just they're going to struggle. Yeah.
So, I mean, you talked about, or you alluded to scenarios which could be a complete disaster. So give me an example. I'm curious of why we simply just can't team up with a company. Let's say, I mean, you could use Microsoft or HP or somebody. So a big, an IBM, whatever, that's a well-known brand. You think, oh, well, you know, if we partner with them, or we're, let's say, a smaller firm, that's going to get a ton of leverage. So what potentially could go wrong there? Just give me a couple of examples.
Well, plenty. Because I think particularly if you're a smaller company, you need to recognize that IBM, HP, Microsoft have thousands of partners, tens of thousands of partners, right? And you're one of a number. So you need to recognize that you may call them a strategic alliance, but they will just call you a partner, right? Because you are. Yeah. That's the first thing. So you need to be very clear on what that is. The second thing is, what you need to take a look at always is go back to your strategy. Is your strategy saying that you need to do X, Y, Z, right? And where is a shortfall in terms of what you need to be doing? And will that shortfall be met if you chose someone like Microsoft or HP or IBM as a partner, right? And how do you go about doing that in a successful way? Yeah. Do your customers want that, or are you doing it just because you want a bit of brand leverage? And the customer need is really, really important, because if you don't bring that customer in properly, and you're not saying to yourself, I can create competitive advantage in working with Microsoft or HP or IBM, then you're just in the same race as the others. You're not getting ahead of the game. And I think that's what you need to be thinking about, is how do I get ahead of the game? Yeah. And will the potential partner help create that competitive advantage for me?
Right. So yeah, how it's almost like, how are they going to help me? Yeah,
and how are you going to help? And how are you going to help them? But in total, you have to put the customer at the very center. How is it going to help the customer? Are they going to be better by us working with Microsoft or an HP or an IBM? Are they going to get the right solutions to make their life better?
Mm.
Because if you're not doing it, then you really need to think about why you're doing it. Yeah.
Yeah. Which comes back to the win-win-win. You got to be that kind of almost your starting point and work backwards.
Correct. And the thing that I would encourage any people who are listening in the alliance and partnership space, I would encourage them to think about a proper three-way value proposition. Yeah. And you see a lot of that. You see, I scout the market very, very regularly, and I see a lot of that. And you do see great announcements from organizations where they actually talk about how they're coming together to partner to create value, to create benefit for the people they're looking to serve. Yeah. Whether it be in the pharmaceutical space, or whether it be in the technology space, or whether it be in any other industry. It's when you start seeing that all of a sudden you think they get it. They understand what they're doing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense. So how do you create the value in the alliance partnership?
Again, I think it comes back to what you need to think about is you need to create value for the customer, right? And how do you create the value is by actually bringing the needs and contributions from each of the players that you're partnering with together, right? How do you create the 1 + 1 is 3? Where are the complementary capabilities of when you bring it together creates more than 1 + 1 is 2? And that's what you need to be doing. Yeah.
Right.
And that the 3 that you're creating or more is the bit that's going to be consumed by the customer. And if the customer doesn't see that, then you have a problem, right? So you have to think about not just what I bring, but what we bring. And it's a whole mindset thinking of moving from it's about me to it's about we. Yeah. And when you start thinking about the we, what are we collectively doing together to bring value, bring new value to our customers or the beneficiaries of our service, that's when you start to create the value. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. That totally makes sense. And so, okay, let me think about if that's where you're at in terms, you've talked about the step by step, how to build up to, right, do I need to consider a strategic alliance? What are the steps? Where are the gaps? What are the needs? How do I then identify, appropriate contenders for that? Where are we trying to get to? So what's the win-win-win for everybody?
Yep.
What are the elements of let's say, managing that partnership now?
Right. So that needs to be managed in a number of ways. And again, my partner and I talk about this a lot because we run masterclasses. We train people, right? I call them world-class masterclasses from that perspective. We train people and we talk about how the way to set it up, first of all, is through creating the me to we, right? It's really creating that whole scenario of how are we going to do that. Then what you need to do is need to come together from a governance perspective to drive it all and create the right kind of team charter, the right business plan, etc., and obviously the right governance structure that goes behind it. And then when you come to launch it, you need to have the right kind of culture that goes behind it. Now, we haven't touched on culture because culture is really, really important, but you got to create the right culture that everyone's going to buy into. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that those are kind of some key building blocks you need to be thinking about in terms of how do you then go about doing it. Yeah. And the executive sponsor is really important. Executive sponsors on both sides are really important if it's a strategic alliance. Yeah. And you do it from that perspective, right? Now, culture is important, by the way. Culture is really important. And a lot of people say, yeah, but how do you create this culture? And I will quite often say, even when you're doing the assessment between your partners, you're never going to get complete alignment of cultures. Never. Yeah. It's rare if you get it, but you otherwise you're unlikely to get that. But what you need to do is create the third culture. And that third culture is a culture of the alliance, right? And that will have some really important things around it. It'll have some principles and some norms around how we're going to behave with each other, how we're going to communicate with each other, how we're going to treat each other, how we're going to respect each other. Yeah. You start to create that culture of working together which is what we call the third culture. And I think that's really, really important how you do that. But you also need to be mindful that if your own company culture is non-collaborative, right, you're going to struggle. You're going to struggle because it comes back to the internal piece again.
Yeah.
So I would say one of the things that needs to happen is if your company is really serious about partnering and alliances, its own culture is going to have to change. Yeah. And the culture is going to have to move from a control-based culture, which is normal for businesses, to a trust-based culture. Yeah.
Right.
And that's going to need to happen.
So moving from controlling to trust.
Yeah. I mean, it's normal for businesses to say, I want to control it, right? It's a control-based culture, but they need to be move to a trust-based culture. And I know that there's a particular CEO that my alliance partner knows very well. It's a company that's not small in any way, shape, or form, but he lives and breathes, having a collaborative culture right throughout his organization. Everything that he does is collaborative, and he instills that in the entire business. And as a result, that company does extremely well in its partnering activities, right? So there is a very positive knock-on effect from that perspective.
Yeah. And I can imagine even take strategic alliances out for a second, just having that collaborative environment. It's a whole different environment to work in for people.
Absolutely. And even if you take that out, Leela, there's a great example of how a collaborative culture can actually help organizations or even destroy something they're doing. And I've taught people around this internal collaboration perspective and having the right culture. I look at the example of Sony versus Apple. Yeah. Sony was the king of, Walkmans, etc., portable devices. Okay. Then Apple came along. It was starting to develop its iPod, etc. The interesting thing is Sony had all the assets. It had the music business, it had all the other bits and pieces it could bring together. The problem was that the culture in the organization was not collaborative, it was combative, right? So each business unit was fierce of their own business unit and said, I'm not collaborating with you. I'm going to do my own bit, right? So they couldn't bring all the assets together. And guess what Apple did? It just jumped on the bandwagon. It did whatever collaboration needed to, created the iPod. It took Sony out of the business in no time, right? So there's a great example of having the right kind of culture, collaborative culture, etc., to do things. Yeah, Apple didn't have all the assets, but they had to go and to collaborate to get the assets. Sony had the assets internally, and they couldn't do it.
Yeah, in fact, I like that example. That's so powerful, isn't it?
Yes.
Now you look at the two now.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, culture plays an important part for everyone. But it's just not only for the employees, but the bottom line.
Correct. Well, as a quote from Peter Drucker says, culture eats strategy for breakfast. He's absolutely right. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. And that's in the area of collaboration and alliances, partnerships. That's absolutely spot on. Yeah. Strategy is important. Don't get me wrong, but if the culture is not right and supportive, you're going to struggle. Yeah,
makes sense. Totally. So, what do you see as the future of strategic alliances? Because you said at the start about it, it's a must-have now. So, what do you see as the future?
I think it's a huge future, and the pandemic has just been, for people like me who are a passionate alliances professional. I love what I do. I just think the future is fantastic because there are several things that are driving this. I mean, the whole digital landscape is changing, right? And I think every company needs to move in that direction. And the only way of doing it, and I've heard a CEO from a big technology consulting company saying, you can't not work with alliances. You have to work with alliances if you're going to continue to be a leader. Because if you don't, you'll just become a laggard. So the way I look at it, it's huge, and it's corroborated by the fact that I've seen a lot of industry reports from advisory firms, etc., that actually say that of the CEOs they interview, at least 3/4 of them say alliances is going to be critically important for how we actually grow our business and create competitive advantage and transform digitally, etc. And around innovation, etc. Collaborative innovation. So they see it as critically important. So I see it as being huge moving forward, and it'll only get more intense as we move forward. Yeah.
Definitely.
And it's not just in the tech world. I think every single industry we're going to see that in. The two big industries that leverage on alliances are technology and pharma, biopharma. But I'm seeing a lot of other industries that are jumping on it. The financial services industry is jumping on it, etc. So you're seeing a lot of that happen. And the other interesting dynamic is technology as a sector is now stepping into other industry verticals. It's stepping into the healthcare. It's stepping into financial services. Those already done so. So you see things like health tech, which is important. You see things like fintech, which is important, or insure tech, which are important. So you can just see that it's going to be important because technology companies don't know anything about health. Health companies don't know things about technology. So guess what? They're going to have to partner, and it's already happening. It's already happening. Yeah. So it's a big, bright future. It's a big, bright future.
Yeah.
Opportunities to fail are very, very high. Yeah. Opportunities to succeed are absolutely there, but companies need to do it the right way. And that's why I say alliances is the new leadership. It requires a leadership competence to be able to do that.
Yeah. And I'm guessing that's something that you share within your masterclasses.
Absolutely. So what my alliance partner and I do, his name is Peter Simoons, by the way. So what we do is we actually, as alliance professionals, we live and breathe that, and we train people up on that. And the thing that we do is it's not just theoretical stuff. We actually have practical examples because we've both been in industry. We've both borne the scars of where seeing it go wrong. Both got the accolades of where it's gone right. So we bring that experience into our masterclasses and show people how to do this such that they can actually take it back into their business from day one. Yeah. And we're seeing the impact of that, which is good. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. I love it. So tell me, what can you say about the value of partnering with competitors?
It's critically important. I think a lot of companies are, for obvious reasons, will say, I don't want to collaborate with my competitor, right? Because they're competitors.
Yeah.
But I'm seeing a lot of value being generated through this thing called co-opetition, which is collaborating with your competitors. Co-opetition or co-opetition.
Co-opetition, okay.
Co-opetition, or it's like I want to work with my competitor. It's like frenemy, right?
Right.
Frenemy. So, but co-opetition is a term in the alliance space that's known. I think I've seen a lot of reports that actually say companies can generate an additional, at least up to 25% more value by working with their competition. And I'm seeing a lot of that. A lot of that happens in the tech space. And I'm sure, Leela, you've seen that, where you get technology companies who previously were competitors who now collaborate. You got Microsoft collaborating with IBM and collaborating with Amazon, etc. You wouldn't have had that before. So you get that. If I take a great example, a couple of great examples of companies that have done that recently, if you think about the creating vaccines for the pandemic, right? You had two big giants, GSK, GlaxoSmithKline, and and Sanofi. Yeah, two big leaders in the vaccine space. They formed a big strategic partnership, big strategic alliance to come together to create a new vaccine, right? The purpose was clear. The purpose was we're going to focus on leveraging our capabilities to create a vaccine. They haven't yet created it because there's been some challenges, but they're close to it. But they came together to create that, and that's what they want to do. And the purpose is to save lives. Yeah. So there's an example. You think about the Pfizer BioNTech one, right? They kind of competed, etc., but they've collaborated. They've come together. And in the car industry, a topical one is Renault Nissan. And I know it's all over the news at the moment because the car is going, etc. But Renault Nissan competed in the car market, but they created a phenomenal alliance back in the 1990s, and it's still going strong. Yeah. And it's fantastic what they've actually done, created so much value from that. And there's many, many, many examples of that. So collaborating with your competitors is actually a good thing, providing you can box it. right? Providing you can contain it and say, this is where we can actually work together, but in other areas we're going to compete, right? So put a nice strong boundary against it, but my goodness me, you should do that. And the most mature companies know how to go about doing that. So I would strongly encourage that, strongly encourage it.
Fantastic. Anoop, this has been a wealth of knowledge and information shared. Thank you so, so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
All aspects, all angles of strategic alliances, the what, the why, the how. It's been phenomenal. So thank you so much. We've had Paul hopped on. I'm not sure, Paul, if you're still on. Hi, if you are still watching. A great interview. Thank you very much. And yeah, if you guys have any questions, whether you're watching here live or you are watching on the replay, do pop them in the comments, tag in myself or Anoop, and we will come back and answer your questions. If you have any comments, please share them as well. Any thoughts about what Anoop has talked about today? And you can connect with Anoop here on LinkedIn also. So do reach out and connect. And if you've got any questions or you want any help, then Anoop is the man to be speaking with. So Nick, thank you once again for today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Very insightful for me as well. And I will catch up with you very soon.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Thank you.
You're welcome. Take care.
All right. And you.